They say betrayal cuts the deepest when it comes from the people you trust the most. The ones you'd never, in a million years, think could hurt you. A short pause. The sound of a deep inhale, like someone struggling to find the right words. I used to believe family meant protection. That no matter what, no matter how bad life got, family would always be your safe place. Your home. But I was wrong. So wrong. If someone had told me back then that my life was about to change forever, that I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life, I would have laughed. I would have told them they were crazy. But looking back now, I should have seen the signs. The little moments I ignored. The warnings I refused to hear. You see, for years, I felt like a ghost in my own marriage. I was there, but I wasn't seen. I was spoken to, but never heard. Touched, but never felt. My husband was slipping away from me. And I didn't even know if he cared. And you know what the worst part was? I didn't even know if I cared anymore. That's when he stepped in. My brother. My own flesh and blood. The one who was supposed to protect me. Not this. It started small. So small that I could pretend it was nothing. A look. A touch. A moment too long. And then it became something I couldn't take back. What happened that night? I wish I could forget. But some scars don't fade. And some mistakes, they don't just break you. They destroy you. This is my story. And I don't expect you to understand. I don't expect you to forgive me. But maybe, just maybe, you'll see how easy it is to fall when you're already broken. I used to believe in fairy tales. Not the kind with castles and knights, but the kind where love was enough. Where marriage meant partnership, understanding, forever. Where family was a place of warmth, a place of safety. And for a while, I really thought I had that. I was a wife. A mother. The kind who packed school lunches with little notes inside, who remembered birthdays down to the smallest detail. The kind who would stay up late, waiting for her husband to come home, just so he wouldn't have to eat dinner alone. That was me. That was who I was. But somewhere along the way, things changed. He changed. At first, I thought it was just stress. Work, deadlines, life. But then I started noticing the little things. How he never touched me anymore. How he'd turn away in bed, leaving a space between us that felt like an ocean. How his laughter came easier when he was staring at his phone than when he was looking at me. I asked myself over and over, did I do something wrong? Was I not enough? Was I asking for too much just to be seen? And then, there was my brother. My brother has always been the fun one. The cool uncle. The one who could make you laugh even on the worst days. He had this way of making everything feel lighter, easier. And I needed that. I needed to feel something again. I didn't realize it at first. How dangerous it was. How something so innocent could become something else. But looking back now, I see it. The way he looked at me. The way I let him look at me. It was harmless. That's what I told myself. He was just my brother. He was just being kind. It was nothing. But the heart has a way of twisting the truth to fit what it wants. I remember the first time I felt it. The shift. The moment I knew, deep down, that I was standing at the edge of something dangerous. We were just talking. About life. About how things never turn out the way you expect. I told him I felt invisible. That I didn't even know if my husband saw me anymore. He didn't say anything right away. He just looked at me. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. It lasted only a second. But in that second, everything changed. I should have pulled away. I should have stopped it right then and there. But I didn't. And that was my first mistake. It was supposed to be a happy night. A celebration. The house was full, family, friends, music, laughter. But I felt like a stranger in my own home. I stood there, watching, smiling at all the right moments, pretending to belong. But inside, I was somewhere else. Somewhere far away. My husband sat across the room, head down, fingers tapping away at his phone. He hadn't looked at me all night. He hadn't looked at me in years. I told myself it was normal. That this was just marriage. That people grow comfortable. That the spark fades. That this emptiness, this quiet suffocation, was just part of life. But then, I caught his eyes on me. My brother. His laughter was the loudest in the room. His energy filled the space, pulling people in. And when his gaze met mine, for the first time that night, I felt something. It started small. A glance. A moment of understanding. He saw me. Not as a wife waiting for attention that never came. Not as a woman slowly fading into the background of her own life. Just me. Hours passed. The house buzzed with conversation, but I barely heard any of it. I was aware of him, his voice, his presence, the way his laughter reached me in ways my husband's silence never could. And then, suddenly, he was beside me. "You okay?" His voice was soft, careful. I almost lied. Almost told him I was fine. But something about the way he asked, like he already knew, made the words catch in my throat. I didn't answer. I just let the silence speak for me. He didn't push. Just stood there, watching me, waiting. And then, without thinking, he reached out, his hand brushing my shoulder. Just for a second. Just enough to make my skin prickle. Just enough to send a shiver down my spine. It was nothing. Just a touch. Just a moment. But something inside me shifted. I stepped away, laughing nervously, trying to shake it off. But my heartbeat betrayed me, thudding too fast, too loud. "You deserve better," he said. And for the first time in years, I believed it. I should have walked away then. Should have ignored the way my pulse quickened, the way his words lingered longer than they should have. But I didn't. I stayed. And that was my first mistake. The night continued, but I wasn't there anymore. My husband still hadn't looked at me. But my brother had. And suddenly, that was all I could think about. The little moments that came after felt different now. His hand brushing against mine as we reached for the same dish. The way his eyes found mine across the room. The way my skin burned when he leaned in to whisper something, his breath warm against my ear. I told myself it was innocent. That I was reading too much into it. That it was nothing. But deep down, I knew better. By the end of the night, when the house was quieter, when people were leaving, I could feel it in the air. Thick. Unspoken. Something had shifted. He hugged me goodbye. A simple hug. Nothing unusual. But it lasted a second too long. Just long enough for me to notice the way my body reacted. Just long enough for me to realize. I didn't want to let go. When he finally pulled away, he looked at me. Really looked at me. And I knew. I should have ended it there. Should have stepped back, shaken it off, told myself it was all in my head. But I didn't. Instead, I let it happen. I let myself feel it. And that was my second mistake. I told myself it was nothing. A moment. A slip. A thought I should have never entertained. But thoughts don't disappear just because you tell them to. The night ended, but it didn't feel over. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my husband asleep beside me, his back turned. My body was still, but my mind wouldn't stop. I replayed everything. The look in his eyes. The warmth of his arms. The way my heart stuttered when he held me just a second too long. The way I didn't want to let go. It was innocent, I told myself. Just comfort. Just a moment where I felt seen, and wasn't that normal? Wasn't that harmless? But if it was so harmless, why couldn't I stop thinking about it? I turned onto my side, watching the slow rise and fall of my husband's breath. I waited for something to come, guilt, regret, shame. But the only thing I felt was a quiet ache. A longing I couldn't name. The next morning, I told myself I'd move past it. That whatever had happened, whatever I thought I felt, it wasn't real. That I'd go back to normal. So, I did what I always did. I made coffee. I packed lunches. I kissed my husband on the cheek as he rushed out the door, his eyes still on his phone. He barely mumbled a goodbye. And then my brother texted me. Just 3 words. "You okay?" I shouldn't have answered. I should have deleted it. Ignored it. Pretended like last night never happened. But instead, my fingers hovered over the screen, my pulse quickening. I started typing. Stopped. Typed again. Backspaced. What was I supposed to say? That I wasn't okay? That something had woken up inside me last night, something I wasn't ready to name. I kept it simple, Yeah, I'm fine. I wasn't. Days passed, but nothing felt the same. I moved through my routine like always, but I wasn't there. My mind was stuck in a loop, replaying every detail, every second that had led to that moment. And the worst part? I started noticing things I hadn't before, like how my husband barely looked up from his phone when I spoke. How he forgot things, small things, but things that mattered. How he never asked how I was doing, if I was happy, if I felt seen. And then, there was my brother. He noticed everything. The way I hesitated before answering a question. The way I laughed, but it didn't quite reach my eyes. The way I bit my lip when I was thinking too hard about something I didn't want to say out loud. I kept telling myself it was nothing. That I was reading too much into things. That I was just lonely, and loneliness makes you see things that aren't there. But then, the moments started piling up. A text message here. A knowing glance across the room. A brush of his hand against mine that lasted just a second too long. And each time, my stomach twisted. My breath caught. My heart raced. I told myself I was imagining it. That it was all in my head. That this was just comfort. Just attention. Just something to fill the spaces my husband no longer did. But late at night, when the house was quiet, when I was alone with my thoughts, I knew the truth. I wasn't imagining anything. Something was happening. Something I wasn't sure I could stop. The first real crack came one evening when my husband came home late. Again. No explanation, no apology. Just a tired sigh as he set his bag down and went straight to the couch, phone in hand. I watched him for a long time, waiting for him to look at me. Just once. To see me. To notice the way my shoulders had started sagging under the weight of all the things I wasn't saying. But he didn't. And then, my phone buzzed. A message from my brother? Wanna talk? I shouldn't have said yes. I should have put my phone down, forced myself to focus on the man sitting a few feet away from me. The man I had promised my life to. But instead, my fingers moved on their own. Yeah, call me. I slipped into the bathroom, locking the door behind me. My heart pounded as the phone rang once, twice, before his voice came through the speaker. Hey, that was all it took. One word, and I felt something inside me unravel. We talked. About nothing. About everything. About how tired I was. How empty I felt. How some nights I didn't even recognize my own life anymore. And he listened. Really listened. Not half-heartedly, not distracted. Just there. And when I hung up, I sat there, staring at my reflection in the mirror, my chest tight with something I couldn't explain. I should have felt better. Lighter. But I didn't. Because deep down, I knew what I had just done. I had started leaning on him in a way I shouldn't have. In a way that crossed a line. In a way that made it impossible to turn back. That was the night I realized it was already too late. It should have stopped there. I should have cut ties, set boundaries, walked away before it became something I couldn't take back. But I didn't. I let it keep going. And when you keep feeding something, no matter how small it starts, it grows. It was a Thursday night. Nothing special. Just another evening in a house that barely felt like home anymore. My husband was supposed to be home for dinner. He had promised, but when I checked my phone, there it was. A message. Just 5 words. No explanation. No apology. Won't make it. Work late. I stared at the screen, my fingers tightening around the edges of my phone. I should have been used to it by now. The cancellations. The empty spaces where he used to be. But that night, it felt different. He hadn't even bothered to call. I put the phone down, exhaling slowly, trying not to let the anger rise. And then, before I could stop myself, I sent another message. Still coming over? A reply came seconds later. Of course. An hour later, my brother was at my door, a bottle of wine in one hand, his usual smirk in place. But something in his eyes told me he knew. He always knew. Dinner was already on the table. 2 plates instead of 3. And as he sat across from me, pouring wine into my glass, I told myself this was fine. It was just dinner. Just family. But the air between us had changed. We ate. Talked. Laughed. About stupid things, old stories from when we were kids, the way I used to hide under the covers during thunderstorms, the time he broke his arm climbing a tree because I dared him to. The more we drank, the easier it became to forget that something was wrong. That something was building between us, piece by piece, moment by moment, in the spaces where my husband used to be. At some point, I don't know when, the conversation slowed. The laughter faded into something quieter, something heavier. The wine bottle was nearly empty. The candle on the table burned lower, the shadows stretching longer. I don't know who moved first. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was him. But suddenly, he was closer. Close enough that I could feel the warmth of his breath, the quiet rise and fall of his chest. And then, he reached out. His fingers brushed against my temple, trailing down to tuck a loose strand of hair behind my ear. It was such a small thing. Innocent, even. But the second his skin touched mine, something inside me cracked. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just sat there, feeling my pulse hammer against my ribs, feeling the way the air had thickened between us. His fingers lingered, just a second too long. Just enough for me to see the question in his eyes. My heart slammed against my chest. I should have stopped it. I should have pulled away, laughed it off, made a joke, something, anything to break whatever this was turning into. But I didn't. Because the truth? In that moment, I didn't want to. Then, the storm came. A sharp clap of thunder. The lights flickered. Then, darkness. For a second, neither of us moved. The room had plunged into blackness, the only light coming from the dim flicker of the candle between us. Shadows danced against the walls, long and shifting, twisting reality into something else. Something more dangerous. The silence stretched, thick, suffocating. I could hear nothing but the storm outside, nothing but my own breath. And his. Then, softly, barely a whisper, "Come here." My breath caught. My hands clenched into fists beneath the table. I should have said no. I should have left the room, left the house, anything to put distance between us. But I didn't. I moved. It was slow, cautious, like stepping across thin ice, knowing it could shatter beneath me at any moment. He was close now, his face barely a breath away. I could see the flicker of candlelight reflected in his eyes. And God, they were looking at me in a way no one had looked at me in years. My pulse pounded so loudly I could barely think. His hand lifted, hesitated, then skimmed lightly along my arm. A feather-light touch, so soft it made my skin erupt in goosebumps. My breath stuttered, my throat closing up. He leaned in. And for the briefest second, just a second, our lips hovered, so close I could feel the warmth of them, the unspoken promise in the air between us. But then, reality slammed into me like ice water. I jerked back so fast the chair scraped against the floor. My breath was ragged, my pulse a wild drumbeat in my ears. I can't. My voice was barely more than a whisper. A plea. A warning. His eyes searched mine, something unreadable flickering behind them. And then, he said it. The words that shattered everything. "But are you happy?" The question hung between us, heavy, dangerous. The kind of question that didn't have an easy answer. The kind of question that could ruin everything. I couldn't speak. Couldn't move. Because the truth? The real, gut-wrenching truth. I didn't know anymore. I turned away, gripping the edges of the table like it could somehow hold me together. My mind screamed at me to walk away, to shut this down before it spiraled into something I couldn't undo. I forced myself to breathe, forced my voice to come out steady, even though my entire body was trembling. "You should go." He didn't argue, didn't fight it, just nodded slowly, watching me in that way that made my stomach twist. Then he stood, grabbed his jacket, and walked to the door. He paused before stepping out. One last look. One last chance for me to change my mind. But I didn't. I stayed rooted to the spot, my arms wrapped around myself like I could somehow hold in the war raging inside me. The door clicked shut, and I collapsed into the nearest chair, burying my face in my hands, my entire body shaking with something I didn't know how to name. I should have felt relief. I had stopped it. I had made him leave. I had done the right thing. So why did it feel like something inside me had just broken? Why did my lips still burn with the memory of a kiss that never even happened? I should have kept my distance. I should have learned from that night, from the way my hands trembled after he walked away, from the way my heart pounded as if it was trying to tell me, stop now before it's too late. But I didn't. Because the truth? Some things are already in motion before you even realize it. Some lines are already crossed before you've even stepped over them. The weekend trip was planned weeks ago. A family cabin by the lake. A getaway. A chance to breathe. I thought maybe it would be good for us. For me. That maybe with space, I could clear my head, push everything back where it belonged. But then my husband backed out. Again. Work is crazy, he said. You understand, right? I nodded, smiled, said all the right things. But inside? Something inside me snapped. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't even angry. I was just tired. Tired of waiting. Tired of hoping. Tired of pretending that any of this still hurt the way it was supposed to. The cabin was beautiful. The air crisp, the scent of pine and lake water thick in the breeze. The kind of place that was supposed to feel peaceful. But my mind was anything but. The first day passed in a blur of laughter, meals, the warmth of family filling the space my husband had left empty. And him. Always there. Close enough that I felt him, even when I wasn't looking. And then, the second night came. It was late. The house was quiet, everyone else asleep. I couldn't sleep. My thoughts wouldn't let me. So I stepped outside, barefoot against the cold wooden porch, breathing in the night air, trying to settle the storm inside me. I heard footsteps before I saw him. I didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Couldn't sleep? He asked. I shook my head. He nodded as if he understood. And then, like it was the most natural thing in the world, he said, come on. Let's walk. I hesitated. Just for a second. But then I followed him. The night was cool, the only sound the soft rustle of the trees, the occasional whisper of the lake lapping against the shore. We walked in silence for a while. It should have been comfortable. It should have been easy. But it wasn't. Because the space between us was charged, thick with everything unspoken, everything we had been pretending wasn't there. We reached the water's edge, the moon casting silver ripples across the surface. He shoved his hands into his pockets, exhaled long and slow. You seem different, he said. I swallowed. Different how? He glanced at me then, his gaze steady. Like you're waiting for something that isn't coming. I felt the words like a punch to the chest. I turned away, staring at the lake, at the endless dark expanse stretching out in front of me. I don't know what I'm doing anymore, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Yeah, he said. Me neither. The silence after that was unbearable. Because there it was. The thing neither of us had dared to say out loud. The truth hanging in the air, waiting to be acknowledged. I should have left. I should have turned back, walked away, gone back to the house before I did something I couldn't take back. But then he reached for me. Fingers grazing against my wrist. Not grabbing, not pulling. Just there. Waiting. And I let him. I turned, my breath shaky, my heart a frantic drum in my chest. He was so close. Close enough that I could see the way his chest rose and fell, the way his lips parted like he wanted to say something but didn't know how. And then, he touched my face. A slow, careful brush of his fingertips against my cheek, trailing down to my jaw. A touch so light, so devastatingly gentle, that it shattered the last piece of my restraint. I should have pulled away. I didn't. And then, his lips were on mine. The kiss was soft at first, almost hesitant. As if we were both giving ourselves a chance to stop, to step back, to undo what was happening before it was too late. But we didn't stop. We didn't step back. The hesitation melted into something deeper, something desperate, something that had been building for too long to be contained anymore. His hands tangled in my hair, mine gripping the fabric of his shirt, pulling him closer, as if we could somehow erase all the reasons why this was wrong. I don't know how long it lasted. Seconds? Minutes? A lifetime? All I know is that when we finally broke apart, Gasping, my hands still clinging to him like a lifeline, reality crashed down around us. My breath hitched. My stomach turned. I felt everything all at once: relief, guilt, longing, fear. A war inside me I didn't know how to fight. His forehead rested against mine, both of us still breathless, still caught in the wreckage of what we'd just done. "We shouldn't have done that," I whispered. He didn't move. Didn't step back. His hands were still on me, warm, steady. "I know," he murmured. But he didn't let go. We told ourselves it was a mistake. That it could never happen again. That we had crossed a line, and now we had to find a way back. We stood there for what felt like forever, the night wrapping around us, the weight of what we'd done pressing heavy against my chest. And yet, as I finally stepped away, as I turned and walked back toward the house, I knew the truth. It wasn't a mistake. Because mistakes are accidents. And this had been inevitable. The moment I stepped back into that house, I knew everything had changed. I thought I could leave it behind, that I could push it down, bury it somewhere deep, pretend it never happened. But the thing about crossing a line is, there's no going back. It's done. And no matter how much you try to act like you're the same person, you're not. I wasn't. The morning after, I woke up before anyone else. I stood in the bathroom, staring at my own reflection, searching for something familiar in my own face. I looked the same. Same eyes. Same lips. Same tired lines on my forehead. But I felt different. Ruined. Like something inside me had been tainted, and no amount of scrubbing, no amount of pretending, would make it clean again. I tried to go through the motions, fix breakfast, make coffee, smile when I was supposed to. But my hands shook as I set the table, as I poured the coffee, as I stood in that kitchen pretending to be normal. And then, he walked in. My brother. I didn't look at him. I couldn't. Not with the weight of last night still pressed against my skin, still tingling on my lips. I felt his presence before I even saw him, before I even heard his footsteps slow, hesitate. A pause. A silence so thick it was suffocating. I forced myself to move, to keep busy, to keep my hands occupied so I wouldn't have to acknowledge what was lingering between us. He didn't say a word. Just walked past me, grabbed a cup of coffee, and left the kitchen. And just like that, everything between us became unspoken. The drive home was unbearable. My husband sat beside me, rambling about something: work, emails, a client he had to deal with. I nodded when I was supposed to, made the right noises, pretended to listen. But my mind was still in the woods, still standing by that lake, still feeling the ghost of my brother's hands on me. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. I wanted to undo it. But I couldn't. And that was the worst part. I didn't want to. I wanted to feel guilty. I wanted the shame to drown me. But all I felt was the bitter aftertaste of something I had been starving for. I had spent years craving affection, waiting for someone to see me, and now that I had it, now that I had taken it, I didn't know how to let it go. Back home, everything felt wrong. The walls of my house felt tighter. The silence heavier. My husband was right there, but I had never felt so alone in my own home. And then I noticed it. His phone. The way it buzzed late at night. The way he turned the screen away when I walked by. The way his fingers moved quickly. The way his face softened in a way it hadn't in a long time. I wasn't stupid. I knew that look. That quiet urgency. That secret smile. And for the first time, the irony hit me so hard it almost knocked the breath out of my chest. I had spent so long feeling abandoned, waiting for him to notice me. And now it was too late. I had already found what I was looking for somewhere else. Family gatherings became unbearable. I used to love them, the noise, the laughter, the way everyone came together. But now? Now they felt like a stage, a place where I had to put on a performance, where I had to act like everything was fine while my insides twisted into knots. I avoided him. My brother. I made sure I never sat too close, never let our eyes meet for too long, never gave anyone a reason to look at us and see. But he was avoiding me too. He barely spoke to me, barely acknowledged me. And I don't know why, but that hurt more than anything else. Like what happened between us had already been erased, like it hadn't meant anything at all. Maybe that was for the best. Maybe that was what I wanted. But then why did it feel like something inside me was unraveling? Days passed, then weeks. And the space between me and my husband stretched wider and wider, an invisible chasm growing between us, one that neither of us tried to fix. And then, one night, he finally asked. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes, pretending like everything was fine. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching me. Is something wrong? My heart stuttered. The plate in my hands nearly slipped, but I caught it just in time. I forced myself to breathe, to keep my face neutral, to play my part. No, I said. Too fast, too sharp. He didn't look convinced. His eyes searched mine, like he was trying to piece together something he hadn't even realized was missing. You've been acting different, he said. Different. The word almost made me laugh. If only he knew. I shook my head, turned away, focused on scrubbing a plate that was already clean. I'm just tired, I murmured. It wasn't a lie. I was exhausted. But not in the way he thought. He didn't push. He just sighed, muttered something about going to bed, and left me standing there, hands still submerged in soapy water, staring at my own reflection in the window above the sink. I thought I would feel relieved. That I had dodged something dangerous. That I had kept my secret buried for one more day. But as I stood there, listening to his footsteps fade down the hall, all I could think was, how much longer before he stops asking altogether? I thought the worst part would be the moment it happened. The moment I crossed the line. The moment I let my body, my heart, betray everything I had built. But I was wrong. The worst part came after. It came in the quiet. In the spaces between. In the moments when I was alone with my own thoughts, with the weight of what I had done pressing against my ribs like a secret too heavy to carry. It came in the way I couldn't look at myself in the mirror without seeing someone I didn't recognize. I was drowning in it, this thick, suffocating mix of guilt and anger and something else, something darker. I wanted to blame my husband, to tell myself that he was the one who pushed me here, that he was the reason I reached for something that wasn't mine to take. But the truth? The truth was harder to swallow. Because this wasn't just about him. This wasn't just about loneliness or neglect or all the nights I spent lying awake beside a man who made me feel invisible. It was about me. I started watching him. My husband. Studying him the way I hadn't in years. I watched the way his shoulders sagged at the end of the day, the way his fingers ran through his hair when he thought no one was looking, the way his eyes seemed just as distant as mine. And I realized. I had been so consumed by my own emptiness that I never stopped to consider his. Maybe I wasn't the only one who felt like a ghost in this marriage. Maybe I wasn't the only one waiting for something that never came. The thought made my stomach turn. Because if that was true, if he was hurting, if he was struggling, then what had I done? Had I just given up on him? Had I just abandoned him the way I thought he had abandoned me? Had I spent so much time resenting his silence that I never thought to ask why he was so quiet in the first place? The questions tore at me, left me restless, left me pacing the house at night, staring at my phone, fingers hovering over my brother's name, wanting to tell him I couldn't do this anymore. But I didn't. Because even now, even after everything, I wasn't sure if I wanted to let go. I thought about telling my husband. I thought about sitting him down, looking him in the eyes, and telling him the truth. I imagined it 100 different ways. 100 different reactions. The anger, the pain, the betrayal. The way his face would fall, the way his voice would crack when he asked me why. And what would I say? That I was lonely? That I was hurting? That I felt invisible and forgotten and unloved? Would that make it better? Or would that make it worse? Would it be selfish, or would it be justice? Would I be freeing him from a lie, or would I just be handing him a new kind of prison? I didn't know the answer. I didn't know if I ever would. Some nights, I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, feeling like I was trapped in a life I no longer knew how to live. I wondered if he could feel it, the distance, the weight pressing down between us, the invisible wall that had grown taller and thicker with every passing day. And I wondered if he felt it too, the quiet, aching certainty that we had already lost each other long before either of us realized it. But if that was true, if we were already gone, then why did I still feel like I was suffocating under the weight of what I had done? I don't know what to do anymore. I keep asking myself the same questions over and over, hoping that the answers will just appear. But they don't. And the silence in my mind is louder than anything else. I don't even know if I'm asking the right questions. I don't know if I should be asking for forgiveness or just facing the truth. What would you do if you were in my shoes? What would you do if you made the mistake I made? If you had crossed a line you never thought you'd cross? Should I confess? Should I tell him everything or lay it all out and risk tearing apart everything I've ever known? Or should I bury it deep, lock it away, and pretend it never happened? The thing is, I can't stop thinking about what it would mean. About what would happen if I did tell him. Would it bring us closer? Or would it destroy everything we've built? Would it set me free, or would it leave me trapped in guilt, alone with the weight of what I've done? Has anyone ever been in a situation like this? Have you ever felt this kind of pull, this desperate, aching loneliness that drives you to make choices you never thought you'd make? I feel like I'm drowning in it, and I don't know how to get out. Maybe you've been through something like this yourself. Maybe you've felt the ache of wanting to be seen, wanting to feel important, wanted. And maybe, like me, you've turned to the wrong person to fill that emptiness. I want to hear your thoughts. I want to know what you would do. Because right now, I feel like I'm standing at a crossroads and I don't know which way to go. Should I confess? Should I finally be honest with myself and with him? Or should I live with the secret, pretending like nothing ever happened? Is there a way back from this? Please, I need your advice. I need to know that I'm not the only one who's ever felt this lost. Leave a comment below. Share your story. Share your advice. I'm not sure what the right choice is, but I know I can't do this alone. And if you're new here, if you've found yourself lost in a story like mine, subscribe to Shocking Infidelity Saga. We're here to share real-life confessions, to talk about the things that no one else will. We're here to face the hardest truths together. Loneliness can make you do things you never imagined, things you never thought you'd be capable of. It can twist your mind, turn your heart into something unrecognizable, and lead you down paths you never thought you'd walk. But here's the thing, betrayal doesn't always come from a stranger. Sometimes it comes from the people you love the most, the ones you trust the most, the ones who are supposed to protect you, to keep you safe. If you're feeling neglected, if you're feeling invisible, talk about it. Don't wait until it's too late. Don't let yourself get lost in the silence, in the secrets. Because once you cross that line, it's harder to come back than you think. Don't become the villain of your own story. Don't let loneliness make you someone you're not. Talk before it's too late. Have a story to share? Message us. Your truth deserves to be heard. Subscribe for more shocking real-life confessions.